Mil magad cean cóla a híisi anan ma ceist le na háras Washracha agus Lenny agus go hárid an scéim cúteamh atá bartaí agus nach bhfuil tás ná túriscéil in neanón na nealúnsaí solúnta ón rialtas go maith scéim cúteamh I gceist agus ceangailte le sin an siomh I dúm agus an gá pránach le tocailt umláin a dhéanamh an siomh agus na hirsmí déna a nochtú agus tar éis anilíse iad a créalú iad a chur a ríis le dínet. Taoiseach, my question relates to the promised redress scheme. There's a different name on it. There isn't a sign of it. And I ask this question in the context of a finite group of people who are waiting patiently for the government's action. Notwithstanding their courage and fortitude, former residents of mother and baby homes are becoming more anxious, more worried, and vulnerable with each passing day, not to mention angry. The government has a duty to act expeditiously, and particularly given the background and the delay to date. On the 19th of January this year, Minister O'Gorman said the scheme would be drawn up by the end of April. An explanation then was given for the delay that there were many submissions. Again in July, we were told that the interdepartmental group had effectively completed their work. Still no sign of the report. Then we were told it would be in the early part of the new term. We're now into the middle of the new term and there isn't a sign of the report. I'm asking you to tell me when the redress scheme will be published and accessible to those who are waiting, Iverahain. Number two, what communication have you had with the religious orders in relation to their participation in the amount of money needed to fund the scheme? And in relation to Tuam, we have seen the report on television on Sunday night to be published tonight on RTE in relation to Tuam, which is intimately connected with this question. More than 4 years ago, an expert team went in and looked at it in response to the Commission investigation, who had a press release saying there were substantial remains, human remains there. The expert team went in. They are quoted in the documentary as saying, I never in my life walked away from a site like this with human remains before. Their work was a scoping exercise to see what was there. They temporarily protected the site for 6 months and nothing has happened 4 years later. And we're sitting here today, Minister, after a series of mistakes, delays, a report from the Commission that was in your offices from October last year, only a report published in January this year and never given to the former residents till after and so on, and a whole list of other delays, obfuscations, and not to mention tapes and a press release saying they had been destroyed and subsequently not. Given that background, and I'm over time and I'm very conscious of it, it is extremely important that the Taoiseach give us a date today so that we can have confidence and hope.
Well, Barana dus part of Vix Guadan Takta Asoktan Kesha Ordu, or Have Maraka Agus Lenny, Agus on Scheme Kutav, Agus on Siev Idiv Chun, Agus Ra Legwil Gakirik da Yenevig and Realtus, or Have Rachtiocht the Chun, Marsolda Tashin Filchehe, Vishos Cordon Doyle, Big Shake Takta Roshers Cornadala, Saravad. Agus tá bille eile an bille bhuiin le ólas an Bert Information legislation tá sin os Cornadála chomá agus bhí sé sin fáilsethe go luas sa bhliain. In the context of the restorative recognition scheme, I can say to the Deputy that the interdepartmental group set up to develop detailed proposals for the scheme, taking into account of the recommendations of the Commission and going beyond that, have made recommendations. It was informed by consultation with survivors, which took place during March and April, with a very strong response received to that consultation process. The Minister then considered that further and made proposals. The development of the scheme is a very key priority for us. The Minister will be bringing a scheme to Cabinet shortly. There are consultations with the leaders of the parties now on other ministers, and I expect that this will be brought before Cabinet fairly quickly now, within the next number of weeks, if not sooner. And we are anxious to get the balance right, and to devise and approve a scheme that would be responsive to the survivors of mother and baby homes and county homes. And I do accept the delay is one to be regretted, but I think nonetheless, since the decision was made by government to develop such a scheme, the minister has applied himself to this very diligently and worked with the groups concerned, has interacted with government departments and external bodies as well, from a human rights perspective, and we do understand the importance of this, and it will come to government very shortly. In relation to Tuam, as you know, the minister, and I would view it as imperative, along with the minister, to afford the children buried at Tuam the dignity in death that has so long been denied them. He did prioritise the drafting of the proposed bill. It is a very complex piece of legislation. That said, it went for pre-legislative scrutiny by Minister O'Gorman in January of 2021. Numerous submissions were made to the Joint Oireachtas, and a number of people gave powerful and moving testimony. The committee published its report on the legislation in July. The Minister is now carefully considering the recommendations from that process. His intention is to publish the bill following that consultation by the end of the current parliamentary session, bring it through the legislative process as quickly as possible. And he's going to do that. Thirdly, I would just want to make the point in terms of the birth information and tracing proposed legislation. Again, that legislation was published. It's quite radical. It's a major evolution in the legal situation.
Time is up now,
he has written to the committee. It's still in pre-leg before the committee. We need that expedited, and I think that all three aspects, I think, would be very welcome if we could get them got over the line.
Thank you, Taoiseach, and I welcome the fact that you're talking about in the next few weeks, but I've heard that since January, so forgive my reluctance to believe that, number one. Number two, in relation to the scheme, we've had an ample amount of time to learn from previous schemes. The Redress institutional scheme, remember, we created an offence there that if somebody disclosed what they got, they committed a criminal offence. That's what we did with that redress scheme. Then we set up the Magdalene scheme, and then the Ombudsman told us it was maladministered or maladministration. And then we set up Caranua, and it was an insult to the Irish language because we talked about a new friend when it was the old enemy in disguise. And still we go on perpetuating the abuse, the delay, the obfuscation. So, Minister Taoiseach, I want an exact date on when the redress scheme will be published. I want you to answer me in relation to Tuam. The archaeologists, the specialist forensic archaeologists said they walked away from that. They didn't walk away, but they protected it just for 6 months. 4 years later, that site is not protected. We know from Catherine Corliss's sterling work that 796 death certs are there. We don't know if that amount of children and babies are buried there. We just don't need to excavate the whole site to rebury them, which is extremely important. We need to excavate to examine. It is time that we grew up in this country and analysed and examined what happened so we can look from it and learn from it.
On the Tuam side, I mean, the legislation was published, as you know, went through the pre-legislation. Okay, the legislation is intended to complement the Coroner's Act of 1962, that it does not seek to undermine the authority of the coroner and prevent or prejudice any future coronial investigation into what happened at Tuam. So I think the Minister has really acted assertively and proactively in relation to the Tuam side in terms of legislation. What's envisaged is somewhat unprecedented, let's be fair. But he's going ahead and doing it. And likewise, in terms of the birth information and tracing legislation, it's the first government to produce such a radical piece of legislation in terms of access to information without hindrance, that no one can prevent the provision of such intervention. No one person can prevent access to any information sought. And that would mean an awful lot to an awful lot of people out there.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Now, it's been in pre-leg in my view for a fairly lengthy period, and the Oireachtas are meeting people and so on. But I think that's important legislation. In terms of the intervention by government, the scheme, the recognition scheme, as I said to you, that will be within a matter of weeks. We weren't hearing that all year because we couldn't, because the interdepartmental group had to deliberate on it for quite some time. It has deliberated now. It has come to government. There are serious issues
Thank you, Taoiseach.
that have to be addressed by government
Please.
in respect of it, and we'll be back to the House in respect of it.